Well, hello, everybody. Hey, it's Mike and Tamara here again. We have a wonderful topic today, and it's the title is Mental Challenges in Our Training or in Our Racing. And we're just going to have a little chat, Tamara and I. Before we get started, make sure you check out Tamara's website, which is ignitesportsperformancecoaching.com. That's ignitesportsperformancecoaching.com. And just to brag on Tamara, she is uh, a beast on the bicycle, as I've told you guys in the past. But she's also a competitive athlete. She's a licensed coach. She's a nutritionist. She's involved in virtual cycling as a race leader, as a ride leader on the military team, U.S. military esports, and she's overcome a lot of challenges, mental challenges as a coach. And I've been impressed with her on how she's overcome hip surgery. We'll talk about that at the end, and how she has trained and come back. I'm excited. We're 30 days away from getting to ride together over in the mountains of North Georgia, and we'll talk about that. So she's going to talk to us today. We've got some good questions for her about how we can overcome mental challenges and how we train. And so, Tamara, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. I just wanted to let you know I've come off of a few days of being like out of commission sick, and you can probably still hear it. So forgive me if I sound very husky today.
Yeah, well, we'll make it just like we're having a cup of coffee or a glass of water together. And that's one good thing about cyclists is we don't have to drink coffee together, which is good, but we can have a glass of water together and we're still just as good. So,
Oh.
first question for you today: what are some of the most common mental barriers that you see as a coach?
Well, probably the most common thing I see is self-doubt, low confidence. I see a lot of that. Lack of focus. When life, stress, that kind of thing gets in the way, I find that a lot of people will lose their focus. Burnout's a big thing too, which is my job to watch. When burnout starts to happen, mental fatigue starts to happen.
Okay.
Um, and lack of accountability. So I do find, and this isn't in everyone, but I do see a lot of where they uh, uh, someone may blame external factors rather than taking accountability for their own lack of performance.
Okay. That's good. I know personally, I've been challenged with the lack of focus sometimes, and not being intentional about how I train or when I train. There's certain things I like doing that I don't like doing. That we talked about doing
Yeah.
core work in the past, and the work we have to do off the bicycle. That's always tough. How
It is.
about give me an idea of how can you suggest keeping our motivation for going on long rides or tough climbs? Because I funny that we have this question today because I was thinking about earlier that tomorrow we're having some good weather here in East Tennessee. I'm coming back from a we talked about earlier of an injury, and we can talk about that more later, how to get motivated. But I was thinking about a long ride tomorrow and just how am I going to be able to do this? Just the mental aspect of it is just it's tough. So how can we stay motivated when we think about going for a long ride or taking that tough climb?
Well, I'm an endurance queen. I love endurance and I love climbing and I love challenging and pushing myself. And I do know that with my clients, when I ask them to break things down, rather than looking at the whole big picture, start breaking it down into pieces rather than the outcome. You got to trust the process and kind of just break it down by bit. I find that's very helpful, and you've got to really control the negative thinking. You've got to remind yourself, I train for this. This is what I do. I train for this. Only 10 more miles to go. Rather, I've already accomplished 10 miles. There's only 10 more to go. You got to start seeing the glass kind of half full rather than half empty.
That's good. That has helped me on century rides when I break it down into 30-mile segments and just say, hey, I don't look at the whole 100 miles when I'm doing a ride like that. But what about
But
how can we?
But one more thing, sorry, before you go on. Just speaking from the virtual cycling that, as a race leader, as a coach, as a ride leader, we have a slogan with the US military esports, and it's called Embrace the Suck. And sometimes you just have to embrace it,
Yeah.
and that's it, just get it done.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. That kind of goes along with the next question. How can we deal with self-doubt during training? We're in competition because I know there's been times where I'm like, when I get on the bike, I'm like, why am I doing this? What was I thinking? I shouldn't be on the bike today. I should have spent some time in the gym. So how can we deal with that, the self-doubt?
Again, it goes back to what I just said. You have to remind yourself, like, you've trained for this. This is what you do. You have to remind yourself of what your goals are. You have to picture yourself succeeding. These are all things that you constantly have to push away negative and only, I guess it's funny because it kind of ties in with another saying that I always say, change the story. You've got to change the story. So if you've got a negative, there's always a positive. There's always an opposite of what you're thinking. And you've just got to simply change that story.
Okay. And then how can we set realistic but challenging cycling goals?
You've got to set short-term and long-term goals. So your short-term goals can be weekly, monthly, anything kind of under 6 months. Long-term goals would be 6 months to a year. We use a term called SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So everything needs to have a deadline. But you've got to also, so that being said, you have to keep the deadline flexible because the reality is there is injuries. There is, personal issues that come up. There may be, a job relocation, or there may be various things that come up. You can't be so set in stone with that goal. So rather than saying, okay, well, I just give up, I'm giving up on the goal. No, you just adjust the timeline and you still go to the goal.
Right. Interesting. Now, can a rider overcome the feeling of wanting to quit mid-ride? Have you ever had that happen to you, and how'd you overcome it?
Well, Mike, I'm going to tell you a little story. I like endurance, and every year, the cycling club RAFA out of the UK. So
Right.
they hold a RAFA 500 challenge every year, and they give you 8 days between, what is it, December 24th and the 31st, where you can do the Strava challenge, which is 500K. Well, I said, years ago, well, why would I take 8 days to do what I can do in one?
Mhm.
And I think the majority of the listeners probably use some form of indoor virtual type of cycling.
Mhm.
And I choose to, and being that it's, upstate New York, Niagara Falls area, December 24th to 31st is not an ideal time to be outside. So I'm doing that on a virtual trainer. Well, you're looking at 14, 15 hours sitting on a trainer. So that's a long time, right? So I mean, you have to be in this place where you have to remember what your goal is. You have to remember what your why, what your goal is. You can give yourself permission to struggle, but not quit. And for me, riding that 500, for example,
Mhm.
um, I'm counting on, I break it into 5 segments: 100, 200, 300. I even take photos: 100, 200, 300. And then it's not even about how much more. I never say how much more I have to do. I always say how much I've done.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very important. And sometimes, you really, another important point too is checking your hydration, your fuel, because oftentimes when you're fatiguing, when you're saying, I just want to quit, I want to quit,
Mhm.
maybe it's lack of fuel. You're not fueling properly, you're not hydrating properly.
That's
And
true.
you also have to ask yourself, if I quit now, am I going to regret it later?
Oh my goodness, that's a big one. That actually helps.
Only big one.
Yeah,
It's
that
a
actually helps me because I know you'll see it on my Strava uh, thing. You'll see it, and you'll see it in Training Peaks. But there was I guess a couple of weeks ago I was on, and you had sent me to do some intervals, and I'd come back from a road trip the night before, and I was so fatigued that I mean, I just tanked all of the intervals. You know, I mean, it was awful, and it was the worst. I guess the worst training session I'd ever had. But the better training sessions that I've been able to do, I've thought about the positives, kept it in my mind that, hey, look, if I don't do this, I'm not going to grow from it. And so I think that's what I hear you saying. What about can how can one deal with the frustration of not hitting that personal best, that PR? How can we deal with it?
So if you've missed hitting you're going out and
Just
hitting
like
a,
I did, because I mean, I was bummed, and I'm thankful you never said anything. I thought I was going to get a text message like, "What happened? Are you
no,
okay?"
no, yeah, I don't tend to do that unless there's a good reason to do that. But honestly, if it, we all want to get a personal best. That's what we're striving for, right? We want to be better and better and better.
Yep.
Um, maybe, you had high hopes for a race or whatever it may be, and you don't, and you tank. You got to accept it and you got to let it go. You're allowed to be frustrated,
Yep.
but you got to focus on what you're going to do next. Um, because a single ride, a single race does not define your progress at all. So cycling progression, it's not linear. It's constantly evolving. You're constantly challenging yourself. You're constantly improving. So you have to accept it and let it go.
Oh,
And you
that's
have to
good.
channel the frustration into energy, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to do better next time? How are you going to train better for this?
Yeah, that's good.
Are recovery, use it as motivation to train harder, smarter. This is where, I can't stress enough about keeping notes, especially like using Training Peaks. There's a notes feature.
Yeah.
I put everything in there. Even these past 3 days, I haven't trained. And I mean, that's not like me to not
Yeah.
train in
Well,
three
me
days.
too. You know, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I've been off the
Uh,
bike now since Thursday afternoon.
yeah,
Today's
same as,
Monday, and it's killing. I'm like, oh, I got to get back on. But yeah,
yeah.
something you said earlier reminded me of a movie, a great movie. It was Angelina Jolie's first directorial movie where she directed it, and the name of the movie was called Unbroken. And in the movie Unbroken, it's a true story about Louis Zamperini, and he was a troubled kid. He was always in trouble. And one day, the track team was practicing, and the cops were chasing Louis for getting into some trouble. And he ran across the track. Well, his brother saw him, and the coach saw Louis run, and so they basically wooed this guy to become a member of their track team. And there was one of the training sessions where he was with his brother, and his brother was on a bicycle, and Louis was running. And he told Louis, he said, "Listen, if a moment of pain can bring a lifetime of glory."
Mhm.
And Louis remembered it. Oh, yeah. And it really helped him through some times, not just on the track, but in life. It helped him get through it because he was a prisoner of war. I highly recommend the movie. It's a powerful movie.
I'll
But
look for that.
he ended up setting high school records on the track records, and he actually went to the Olympics. And so, yeah, it's a big deal. But Unbroken is the name of the movie. But it kind of tees up the next question. What mental tricks can we use to deal with the mental fatigue that comes from a long time in that saddle? Because sometimes, I'll get my training and they'll say, 3 hours of zone two. And I'm like, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this? So, are there any mental tricks that we can use?
Yeah, you have to change your perspective on pain and accept it as part of the process. I actually posted something on my social media just a few hours ago, a lot like this. You actually have to accept that in order to progress, that you have to push past barriers, and that's going to take mental toughness. You have to avoid thinking about what you have left to do, how hard the rest of it is. Oftentimes when I put a workout into someone's plan, they're of course they're looking at their week ahead, right?
Mhm.
And I get the messages coming, you're evil. Look at what you're doing to me. Like they're already like
Right.
starting to worry about maybe the VO2 workout that they have on Tuesday.
That's right.
And, I would like to see that, sometimes they're kidding, sometimes they're not. And when they're not, I want to see that as accepting a challenge. Like, I'm going to give this everything I have.
Mhm.
And when I get this workout again, I'm going to give it everything I have, and we're going to be able to compare my progress. This is the exciting stuff, is when you get to look back and you can compare where you're progressing. But music always helps too, focusing on your cadence, your breathing. Those are all tricks to help you.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's real good. A couple of more questions, but have you ever experienced a major setback that affected your cycling, and how did you bounce back? And I know we're going to talk about your hip surgery, which is just phenomenal. It's amazing. I'm impressed by it because my motto used to be no pain, no pain. Forget the gain part. But how did you overcome it? How'd you bounce back?
Well, this is going to be a little bit of a long one, but back in
Okay.
2018, I was competing at the national level in bodybuilding, and my hip went on me. And when that happened, I had to give up bodybuilding, but I was ready to anyway, which is, a whole nother story. But I went back to my first love of cycling, and I had to wait 5 years to get that hip. And so there was a lot of pain that I endured over those 5 years. But I still wanted to, I'm an athlete. I still wanted to see those gains. So, I was doing researching and hiring, therapists and whatever to help me be able to still achieve these goals of cycling and, bike fits and all that kind of stuff. So when I got the surgery, I immediately thought to myself, and I had it a year ago, January, I thought to myself, I got a brand new hip. That's it. I'm going to be the best athlete ever. And it didn't turn out that way. I've had roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, and I'm still facing roadblocks. I have an inflamed psoas muscle that
Hmm.
doesn't want to go away. And so, pretty much, my right leg is 8.5 centimeters larger than my left leg because the muscle's atrophied. And I have no power in my left leg. So, all the power in my cycling is coming from my right leg. So now I have no more pain, but I have to work through building all that strength back that I lost for 5 years. And so the interesting thing is that a lot of my numbers sometimes are lower than what they were before I had the hip. And I mean, I could easily throw my hands in the air and say, that's it, whatever, I quit. I'm never going to be better, but I refuse to. I refuse. I refuse to believe that. So I'm doing everything in my power to continue and fix this and build the strength back and meet and exceed my goals.
That's good. Yeah, I've had some challenges with my psoas. It's a tough muscle.
It's
It's
yeah, it
a
is.
tough one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's brutal. So Jason had a question for us before I tell you about my recent mild injury. He said, how do we get motivated for solo training? Just you know, he and I try to ride together as much as we can, but it is hard when you're by yourself. I went down and rode with a friend of mine in Albany, Georgia, and the next day he's like, "Man, I got to find a buddy down here to ride with." And so, tell us how do you get motivated for just solo training?
Okay. Well, I mean, humans are highly social
Mhm.
creatures, right? So we enjoy being with other people and doing things.
Mhm.
Um, Honestly, I think if you're going to ride solo, maybe try doing that virtually on your indoor trainer.
Right.
If you're forced into situations like that,
Mhm.
because you've got your structured training plan that you could have right in front of you on your screen. There's other virtual riders around that maybe might help motivate you a little bit more. You can have your music on, that you're safe, that you don't have to listen for cars and stuff like that.
Right.
But a lot of that motivation comes from, really digging into why am I doing this? What's my goal? You know, I have, what do I need to do to get to my goal? So, you know, it's kind of a little bit of a loaded question in that I do think that there's advantages to virtual cycling that you can utilize, you know, for when you're doing solo training. It does make it a little bit easier to get it done that way. I think that when you're outside, you're losing that social aspect of it.
That's interesting. When I'm on my trainer, I know this may sound shallow, but I like being able to see what I did. You know,
Yeah.
I like going to my totals and look at my total elevation gain. I like getting to that next level. I'm about to go from level 55 to level 56. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but I think I have almost 11 million points, and
Nice.
I know I need to buy a new frame or something in the drop shop. But yeah, that's tough. And then off camera, you and I were talking a little bit about so last week, Jason and I were able to get a KOM on a stretch of road that's a little over 2 miles. And I was able to get it personally, but Jason actually pulled, and that video is up. It's the one that has 447 and it has KOM
Okay.
on the picture. But I actually pulled, something was going on with the hip flexor midweek and my left glute. And I told you about not being able to walk on it for a couple of days without pain.
Hmm.
And today is the first day I've been able to walk on it with zero pain. And then going up the steps here at my office, we talked about just being motivated. I don't think I need any motivation, but I am kind of fearful that I don't want to create any more pain. So there's this. I'm excited that I'm going to get to do a zone two sometime today, and I told you in the text that it would either be 5 minutes or 50 minutes. I don't know what it's going to look like. It really depends on how I feel and listening to my body. Any tips for people who are coming back after an injury? Any best practices that we can look at?
Definitely. So, you know, I mean, depending on what the injury is, I'm a firm believer that remaining completely immobile is going to prolong the injury. You know, if you're having good nutrition and whatnot, you want to make sure that you're pumping good nutrient-rich blood into that injury. I
Right,
do think that you need to listen to your body. You need to listen to what your pain level, only you know what that is,
right,
right? I mean, if you have something like a hamstring injury, you got to use some common sense. You
right.
know, that those are injuries that can take 8, 10, 12 weeks to heal and still get triggered very, very easily. But, you know, you can't be pushing all the time. You know, you might want to even, like I said to you, maybe zone two, you know, maybe that's not the answer. Feel it out in zone one. Just lightly pedal, see how things are feeling. Make sure you get really warmed up, you know, and then you can start pushing a little bit more. Make sure that you're stretching properly, icing. You've got to ice, elevate. You got to do all those kinds of things too, right? It's not just a matter of getting back and doing all that. You got to do all the aftercare as well.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
Anti-inflammatories. You know, it's my own theory. I don't know, you know, it worked for me, but I used to have to take a lot of anti-inflammatories prescription strength for the
Oh
hip.
wow, yeah,
And for me, it didn't make any sense why I would take that after I did a bike ride. Why would I let the inflammation come in and then take the anti-inflammatory? So I always took the anti-inflammatory before I did the bike ride
yeah.
to keep the inflammation at bay. And then I did a lot of icing and stretching and rehab and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's it's good advice. I did some of nature's anti-inflammatory over the weekend. I did some shots of extra virgin olive oil, did a lot of turmeric.
Yep.
I used the TENS unit to keep the blood flowing on Friday and Saturday. But yeah, it is scary. I'm thinking, man, I could be off this bike for a couple of weeks if I don't get this straight. And so it's
But, you know, I think the mistake is a lot of people push too hard too soon. They start to, and I have an Ironman athlete that is famous for doing this. And you know, the minute you start feeling better, you just, okay, it's time. Let's go push now.
Yeah.
And, no, 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 let's reel it back. No, you're not going to do that. Like, let's just make sure things are fine for a week.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do, Tamara. I'm going to take your advice because I am I don't know, I'm optimistically cautious about um, making sure I don't hurt something at my age. Now I wasn't when I was getting that KOM, and I very seldom give it full gas. That day I gave it as close to 100% as I've given in a while, and I paid for it days later. But
You
anyway,
got to
thank you for your
take your
time, man.
time, take your time with it, Mike. Just
I
take your
will.
time and make sure that you've had a few sessions pain-free before you push.
Ah, that's good advice. Pain free before I push. Okay, good deal. Well, thank you so much, Tamara, for your time today. And everybody, if you can, like and subscribe and share these videos. It helps the channel. We haven't monetized our channel yet, but we're approaching 3,000 views for our videos, so that's good news. But we know we can improve. But thanks again, Tamara, for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.